Russia's war against Ukraine has affected the world in ways that many different ways that we may have not imagined at first. Along with surging energy prices, we have to think urgently about food, whether everyone can get it and whether they can afford it. Russia's unprovoked aggression has sparked a global commodity price boom. Agricultural and seafood product markets are rocketing. Wheat is a very good example, and when I say wheat, we are actually talking about bread to feed people. Since the invasion, wheat future prices have risen by 70%. In Ukraine, a major wheat exporter, this year's harvest will be hit by warfare and by general turmoil. This is a country known as a breadbasket of Europe, home to possibly some of the most fertile soils in Europe. The EU stands by Ukraine throughout this conflict and will continue to provide vital support to Ukraine and its people. This also applies to food. Now more than ever, it's time to show our solidarity. This is why we have proposed an EU emergency support program for Ukraine, 330 million euros in grants to help alleviate the suffering of Ukrainians by securing access to basic goods and services, which clearly covers also food. Here, I would point out that Russia appears to be deliberately targeting and destroying Ukraine's food stocks and food storages. Russia's relentless aggression not only means more food shortages for suffering Ukrainians, it also means a supply disruption that affects the whole world, particularly lower-income countries that have to pay more for their basic food imports. From a geostrategic point of view, the EU should contribute to covering the production gap to address the expected global shortage of wheat. The EU is not only a major net exporter, but also actually the one having highest yields globally. But it's not only about wheat. It is a similar story for maize, barley, sunflower oil, and for vital farm inputs like fertilizer and animal feed. So this is all point of today's communication. This is our response to the EU leaders' recent call at Versailles to tackle the issue of global food security, address rising food prices in Europe, and strengthen our resilience regarding certain farm imports. On global food security, the EU will step up humanitarian assistance to low-income food importing countries, as well as for others that are affected by the conflict. We will strongly resist export restrictions and bans on food, including at international fora like the World Trade Organization. This crisis represents a severe threat for many countries, especially for wheat importing countries in regions such as North Africa and the Middle East. If limits were to be imposed on exports, then the world prices would further increase, panic buying and major food security problems could easily follow. For global food security, we need well-functioning supply chains and logistics, not restrictions. At the same time, the EU is working to ensure that food security is integrated in the efforts of the United Nations system so that bodies such as Food and Agricultural Organization can act to prevent further deterioration and protect the most vulnerable. Turning now to the EU. Here, there is no question that our food supplies being under threat. So our food supplies are not under threat because EU is largely self-sufficient for key agricultural products. But given the sharp price increases, this is much more about food affordability for vulnerable people. However, our supply response is limited to the availability of fertile land in Europe. So today, the Commission has adopted an implementing act that allow member states to derogate from certain greening obligations, so to enlarge the EU's farms production capacity. This is an exceptional and temporary measure. Janusz will give you more details, also on measures to stabilize EU agricultural markets and support producers. The Commission also supports member states in using possibilities to reduce the blending proportion of biofuels, because this could lead also to reduction of the EU agricultural land that is used for production of biofuel feedstock, and instead direct it as a food production. Given the exceptional market situation, the Commission has proposed €500 million support package to support EU farm producers affected by the war in Ukraine, allowing them to address market disturbance or trade restrictions. It is worth reiterating the Council's agreement in December on reforming VAT rates. This allows member states to reduce their VAT rates to 0% on certain goods and services that address basic needs, notably food. This can also make member states can also make lump sum transfer to households as a way to address food affordability, and they can use EU funds such as a fund for the European aid for most deprived to help provide food and basic assistance to vulnerable people. There are other possibilities too, like the REACT EU program and the recently proposed Cohesion Action for Refugees in Europe, or CARE, to provide emergency support for people fleeing Ukraine, including food, water and medical supplies. The Commission has also adopted today the temporary crisis state aid rules, or temporary crisis framework, to help support companies hard hit by the crisis and affected by high energy prices. And this temporary crisis framework also covers agricultural sector. Lastly, to look a little beyond the current crisis, it again shows the need for resilience and diversified supply chains, particularly for products like fossil fuels, fertilizer and feed. So we should diversify our food supplies more in the same way as we are doing for the energy. That also applies to our free trade agreements, which should embed the concept of food security. Short-term emergency measures are important, but they do not replace the importance of refocusing agricultural food sector towards sustainability and resilience as a way to cope better with future prices. Food sustainability is fundamental for food security in Europe and around the world too. Thank you, and I now pass the floor to Commissioner Wojciechowski.